I spent years building a successful business, keeping it hidden from my family. It wasn't out of spite or anger. It was out of necessity. For as long as I could remember, I was always the last to be taken seriously, the one who was expected to follow the family's well-trodden path. My father ran a successful real estate company, and my brothers were set to take over. I was always in the background, watching them make decisions that would shape our legacy. No matter how much effort I put into my work, I was still just the youngest, the only daughter, the one who didn't belong in the world they had created. As the years went by, I realized I had to make a choice. Either I would continue to fade into the background, or I would carve my own path. So I built a business that had nothing to do with my father's company, a business that I kept hidden from everyone I knew. At first, it started small, just an idea, a few clients, and the hope that I could prove myself without relying on the family name. But as it grew, so did the weight of the secret. I couldn't tell anyone. If they found out, they would try to take it from me, dismiss it as nothing more than a hobby or a phase. But I couldn't hide forever. My business was thriving, and the more successful it became, the more I realized I was building something that wasn't just mine. It was a testament to everything they said I couldn't do. I wasn't just a daughter. I was a founder. But I knew that when the truth came out, everything would change. How would my family react? Would they feel betrayed? Or would they be proud of what I had achieved without their help? And then one day, the truth came spilling out. It wasn't planned, and I wasn't ready for it, but once the secret was out, there was no going back. My family found out about my business, and suddenly, everything I had worked for was under a magnifying glass. The question wasn't just whether they would accept me, it was whether they could see me as anything more than their little girl. What would they say when they realized I had built something far beyond their expectations? I knew I was different the moment I walked into the family business for the first time. My father, in his immaculate suit, was commanding the room. My brothers, already in their tailored jackets, stood by his side, exchanging professional nods and business strategies. There I was, just a 16-year-old girl in the midst of this world, struggling to find a place at the table. "You can sit there and take notes," my father said, his voice firm but kind. But the note-taking never felt like enough. I had dreams, ambitions, ideas, big ones. Yet, all I was ever allowed to do was observe. That moment set the stage for years of feeling like I was standing on the outside looking in. I grew up in a family that had it all: money, power, influence. The kind of family where success is expected, where being good isn't enough, where you're raised with the knowledge that one wrong move could tarnish a legacy. My father had built his empire from scratch, and my brothers were ready to take it to new heights. But me? I was just the girl in the background trying to prove that I could be more than a bystander. Every day, I watched my father and brothers take center stage, while I was left behind, expected to fulfill the role of the dutiful daughter, get a degree, support the family, and make my own way in life, as long as it wasn't in their world. My dreams were always secondary to their plans. By the time I was 22, the pressure was unbearable. I was expected to follow the script, go to school, get a job, do something respectable. But none of that felt right to me. I didn't want to follow their path. I wanted to create my own. It was clear to me that if I wanted to be taken seriously, if I wanted to prove my worth, I would have to do something drastic. But that would mean stepping outside of the world they had built, and that terrified me. The moment I realized I couldn't fit into the mold anymore came during a conversation with my father. He had always been clear about what I was meant to do: marry, raise a family, stay within the boundaries of what was expected. "You're not built for this world, sweetheart," he'd said. "You have other talents, other skills." It wasn't an insult, but it felt like one. I wanted to scream. I wanted to show everyone, that I could do more than just play a role. But at that moment, I knew something else. If I stayed in this world, following their rules, I would never be the person I was meant to be. I had to leave their expectations behind and create something of my own. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. Starting my own business felt like the only way to escape the suffocating grip of their expectations. I didn't know exactly what it would be or how I would do it, but I knew I had to begin. But how could I tell them? How could I go against everything they had envisioned for me and tell them that I wanted to strike out on my own? The answer was simple. I couldn't. At least, not yet. I started small, quietly working on my business in the shadows. I didn't tell my family. In fact, I didn't tell anyone. It wasn't out of malice, but out of fear. Fear that they would laugh at me. Fear that they would dismiss my ideas as childish or impossible. I kept everything a secret no one could know. I invested what little savings I had, stretched myself thin, and spent countless nights hunched over my laptop, working on something that, in my heart, felt like my only chance at freedom. Every time I got close to telling someone, to revealing what I was doing, the fear would overwhelm me. What if I failed? What if I didn't succeed? And then had to face the disappointment, the "I told you so" from everyone who had doubted me. But with every sleepless night, every hour I spent working towards something that was entirely mine, I felt myself grow more determined. The fear of failure, of being overshadowed by their expectations, only pushed me harder. I kept working in secret, building a foundation for a future that didn't rely on their approval. I had to prove to myself first that I could do this, and that's what drove me through the hardest days. I would sneak in meetings during lunch breaks, take phone calls in the middle of the night, and spend weekends locked away in my room working on the business. It was exhausting, lonely, and sometimes it felt like I was fighting an uphill battle. There were moments when the weight of it all threatened to crush me. I remember one night, working on a proposal for a potential client, when the reality of what I was doing hit me. I was running a business and no one knew. The thought that my family, the ones who had built everything I was supposed to be a part of, would never know the truth was suffocating. But at the same time, that secrecy was what allowed me to grow. It kept me free from the expectations and pressure that had been placed on me for so long. Despite all the self-doubt, despite the financial struggles, something small but important happened. I got my first paying client. It wasn't much, but it was everything. It was proof that I wasn't just dreaming. This was real. This was something I could build. Slowly but surely, the business began to grow, one small step at a time. With each new client, I felt more confident in my ability to make this work. It wasn't just about building a business. It was about proving to myself that I could carve out my own future, that I could be more than just the girl in the background. I was building something real, and it was mine. But the struggle didn't end there. Every victory felt like a small, hard-won battle. There were days when I thought I might collapse from exhaustion. Days when I felt like I couldn't keep the secret anymore, that the weight of it would crush me. But I kept going. I pushed through the fear, the loneliness, and the doubt. And with every success, no matter how small, the business grew. And with it, so did my belief in myself. Slowly, silently, I was building a future that no one, least of all my family, could take from me. The day I signed my first big contract was the day everything changed. It wasn't just a piece of paper or a set of numbers, it was validation. It meant my business was real, and I wasn't just some dreamer anymore. The growth came quickly after that. My company, once just an idea in the dark corners of my mind, was now a force. Clients started reaching out, one after another, all wanting the same thing: innovation, creativity, and a modern touch that the traditional market had long ignored. Slowly, I went from being the person in the background to the one making things happen. The future was bright, but the secret, my secret, was heavier than ever. As the business began to grow, so did the stakes. More contracts came through, more clients, more revenue. The numbers were bigger than I ever thought possible. We expanded operations, hired a team, and began taking on larger projects. I could see the growth in my spreadsheets, in the emails from clients, in the bank account that seemed to swell every month. But the excitement was always tempered by the fear of it all being discovered. No one could know.
Not yet.
Not my family. They would never understand. They would think it was a rebellion, not a triumph. I kept the business under wraps, careful to maintain the illusion of normalcy when I was around them. I would sit through family dinners, talking about nothing that mattered: work, social gatherings, anything to avoid the topic that weighed on me. At family gatherings, I was just their daughter, just their sister. I'd laugh at their jokes, listen to their plans, nod when I was expected to, All while this other life, this powerful, successful life, was happening just beneath the surface. I kept it hidden behind the scenes, careful to keep up appearances, pretending nothing had changed. But the fear? It grew with every success. I began to wonder how much longer I could keep up the charade. What would they think if they knew? Would they feel betrayed? Would they be proud of me? Or would they see it as me abandoning the family legacy? The question gnawed at me day after day. The more successful I became, the more terrified I was of them finding out. I was caught between wanting to shout from the rooftops about my success and needing to keep it a secret for my own sanity. Every time I considered telling them, the fear of their rejection held me back. What if they didn't accept it? What if they thought I was trying to prove I was better than them? I had been the outsider for so long, the one who wasn't quite in the family business. And now, with this new venture, I felt like I was carving out a space for myself that they didn't understand, a place where I was in charge. It was a victory, but it felt like a quiet one that couldn't be celebrated. But it wasn't just about my family's reaction anymore. It was about the fact that I had built something from nothing. I had become someone in my own right, separate from the family name, separate from their expectations. I didn't need their approval, but I wanted it. Every contract, every new client, every email I received made me question if I should finally tell them, but then the doubts crept in again. What would they think? Would they see it as a betrayal, or would they be proud? The truth was I didn't know, and the thought of finding out terrified me. Over time, the pressure of keeping this secret began to take its toll. My personal life became more complicated. I couldn't share my wins with the people closest to me. There was no one to celebrate with, no one who truly understood the magnitude of what I was building. My friends knew I was working hard, but they didn't know the full scope of it. The loneliness grew, and the guilt of hiding my success from my family became unbearable. Every victory felt hollow when I couldn't share it with the people who mattered most. I would come home after a meeting with a new client or the signing of another deal, and I couldn't say a word. My phone would buzz with messages from my family, asking how things were going, and I would lie through my teeth, telling them everything was fine, just like always. It wasn't just the lack of support that hurt, it was the constant balancing act of pretending everything was normal. The energy I spent hiding the truth drained me. The moments of success that should have felt like triumphs were clouded by the weight of the secret. I was building something, yes, but it felt like I was doing it alone. Every success that should have made me proud also made me feel more isolated. The strain started to show in other areas of my life. I was tired all the time, running on empty, while trying to keep up with the demands of both my family and my business. There were moments when I would feel overwhelmed, sitting in my office late at night, trying to push through just one more task while the world outside was asleep. I was driven, yes, but I was also exhausted. The constant pressure of keeping everything a secret was like carrying a heavy weight, one that I couldn't let go of. And then, there were the moments when I almost let the secret slip. There were a few times when I came so close to telling someone. My brother would ask about my plans, or my father would mention something about the future of the family business. I would feel that familiar pull, the desire to open up, to finally say, I did this. I built something. But every time, I would pull back. The fear of rejection, of losing their love and approval, would keep me silent. It felt like if I told them, everything I had worked for, everything I had built, would be invalidated. I wasn't sure if I was ready to risk that. The loneliness became a part of my routine. I was happy with the growth, with the success, but there was no one to share it with. The joy of building something on my own was dulled by the fact that I couldn't fully live in it. I couldn't fully be proud of what I was accomplishing when I couldn't be open about it. There was always a wall between me and the rest of the world, a wall I had built with the decision to keep everything a secret. But as the business grew, so did the tension. I knew this couldn't last forever. The truth would eventually come out. But would I be ready for it? Would they be ready for me? Or would the secret I had worked so hard to keep tear everything I had built apart? It was a phone call that changed everything. One simple conversation, and my carefully constructed world came crashing down. I had just finished wrapping up a meeting with a new investor, one I was hoping would give us the backing we needed to take the business to the next level. I was riding high, still buzzing from the excitement when I saw my phone flash with my mother's name. Hesitant, I answered. "Sweetheart, where are you?" she asked, her voice soft, but with a tone I couldn't quite place. "We need to talk." I felt my stomach tighten. There was a strange weight in the air, a heaviness I couldn't shake. "I'm in the office, Mom. What's going on?" A long pause. Then, she said something that made my heart stop. "Your father knows about the company. He saw the article in the news." The world seemed to blur for a moment. I could hear her words, but they didn't make sense. The article, the secret I had kept buried, was out, not because I had told them, but because the business had grown too big to hide. A story about the firm's success had been published. A few too many people had noticed my name. And now my family knew everything. I tried to keep my voice steady. "What article?" "The one about your business," she repeated, her voice growing more concerned. "Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you say anything?" I wanted to say something, anything to explain, but my thoughts were scattered. All I could think about was how the secret, the lie I had carried for so long, had unraveled in a matter of hours. By the time I got home, the silence in the house was suffocating. My father, who had never once looked my way with anything but distant indifference, was sitting in his favorite chair, his eyes narrowing as soon as I entered. My brothers were there too, standing off to the side, exchanging glances, but saying nothing. "Sit down," my father said, his voice cold, more commanding than I'd ever heard it. I obeyed, unsure of what else to do. "You have a lot of explaining to do," my father continued, his voice low and dangerous. "All this time you were building a business, behind our backs. You knew what this family stood for, and you went and built something else." I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me, but I wasn't ready to back down. I didn't think I had a choice. "I couldn't be what you wanted me to be," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "I've spent my whole life trying to fit into a mold that never fit me. I needed to create something of my own, something that didn't belong to you or anyone else." "You needed to create something?" My father's voice was sharp, almost mocking. "You think this family owes you something? You think you're entitled to step away from the legacy we've built?" His words hit like a slap. "This isn't some little hobby, Julia. This is our name." "I know who I am," I said, my voice breaking as I tried to contain my anger. "And I'm tired of pretending to be something I'm not just to make you happy. I never asked to be part of your legacy. I wanted to build my own." My mother, who had been quiet until then, spoke up softly. "Why didn't you trust us, darling? Why didn't you come to us for help? We could have supported you." I shook my head, fighting back the tears. "You didn't understand. You never understood. All you saw was the family business, the tradition. You never saw me. I needed to do this on my own. It wasn't about you or the business or the name. It was about me proving to myself that I could do something without waiting for permission." For a moment, there was only silence. I felt exposed, raw. My father stared at me, his face unreadable, while my brother stood by, caught somewhere between shock and confusion. My youngest brother, Ryan, was the first to speak. "So what? You just wanted to destroy everything we built." His voice was filled with resentment. "All this time, you've been hiding this from us. And for what? To prove a point." "No," I said, feeling the sting of his words like a slap. "I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I just didn't want to be a part of something that was never mine. I wanted to build something that was mine. I wanted to make a name for myself." The confrontation continued to escalate. My father's anger was palpable, his fists clenched, as if ready to lash out. But it wasn't just anger I saw, it was fear, too. Fear that the legacy he had spent his life building was no longer secure. Fear that his daughter, the one he had expected to follow in his footsteps, was now a competitor. I wasn't just a disappointment, I was a threat. In the midst of the storm, I realized something I hadn't fully grasped before. My father's reaction wasn't just about betrayal, it was about losing control. Losing control of the family, of the business, of the expectations he had placed on all of us. It wasn't just anger, it was panic. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one trembling under his glare. I was the one standing firm. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said quietly, my voice shaking with emotion, "but I did what I had to do. I've built something, and I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you this because it's time you knew. I've done it. I've succeeded. And no matter what you think of me, I won't stop. The emotional toll of the confrontation was immense. I had hoped that my family would understand, that they would see what I had achieved and be proud of me. Instead, I was left with a sense of isolation. My father's disappointment, my brother's silence, it all felt like a weight I couldn't bear. But as I sat there, surrounded by the people who were supposed to love me, I realized something. The family I had always tried so hard to please was no longer my family in the way I had imagined. I had spent so much of my life trying to fit into their mold, trying to prove I was worthy of their love and approval. But now I saw the truth. I had built something on my own, without them, and I had become something they couldn't define. That realization didn't come easily, but it was freeing. I was finally free of their expectations, free to be myself, even if that meant breaking their hearts in the process. As the conversation wound down, I was left with a bittersweet sense of relief. The truth was out, but at what cost? I had come so far, built so much, but I could feel the emotional distance growing between me and the family I had once hoped to please. And while part of me felt a pang of guilt, another part of me was certain I had done the right thing. I had created something that was truly mine. And for the first time, I didn't need their approval to make it feel real. It took time. I didn't expect things to change overnight, but as the weeks passed, something shifted. It wasn't immediate, and it certainly wasn't easy, but the family started to see things differently. I remember the first time my father called me into his office after the confrontation. I had braced myself for another lecture, another round of anger or disappointment, but instead, he simply sat there, looking at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. "You've done well," he said, his voice still strained but less cold. "I may not have agreed with how you went about it, but you've built something, and that takes guts." It wasn't much, but for the first time in my life, it felt like he was actually seeing me, not just as his daughter or a disappointment, but as a person who had done something on her own. That acknowledgement, though small, was the beginning of something. My brothers, too, started to soften. The competitive edge, the bitterness, was still there, but it wasn't as sharp. Slowly, they began to understand what I had done and, more importantly, why I had done it. It took a long time to let go of the constant need for their approval, for their validation. For so long, I had sought their recognition, hoping that if I could just prove myself in their eyes, I would finally feel like I belonged. But with every new project, every new victory, I began to realize that the approval I had been craving wasn't what I needed. I needed to be proud of myself. I needed to see the value in what I had created, regardless of whether they saw it or not. It wasn't easy to admit that to myself. Letting go of the hope that they would come around and finally say, "You did it right," was harder than I expected. But as the business continued to grow, I began to realize that their approval didn't change the truth of what I had built. I had created something from the ground up, and that alone was enough to make me proud. Over time, my family began to come to terms with my success. My father started to talk about business in a way he hadn't before, with a hint of respect in his voice when he mentioned my company. He never fully embraced it, never fully accepted that I had chosen a different path, but he didn't shut me out anymore. My brothers, too, started to come around. They'd ask about my projects, my vision for the future. It wasn't as if they had accepted my choices completely, but there was a mutual understanding now. They realized that my business wasn't just about success. It was about independence. It was about my ability to create something meaningful on my own, something that had nothing to do with the family legacy. I found myself sharing more with them. I talked about the challenges of running the business, the creative process, the ideas I had for the future. For the first time, they were genuinely interested. My father may not have agreed with the path I had chosen, but he could see how far I had come. He could see how my business wasn't just a rebellion. It was a reflection of who I had become, a woman who had found her own way, a woman who wasn't afraid to take risks and stand alone. It was in those conversations, those quieter moments of understanding, that I began to see the real change. It wasn't a sudden shift in how they viewed me, but it was a start. They saw that my business wasn't a rejection of them or their way of life. It was something else entirely. It was a reflection of my independence, my creativity, and my ability to forge a path on my own. Slowly, I started to feel like they were finally starting to see the value in what I had built, not just as a business, but as a part of me. As I reflect on the journey, I realize how much I've changed. The years of secrecy, the fear of disappointing them, the constant pressure to live up to their expectations, it all feels like a distant memory now. I spent so much of my life thinking that success meant meeting other people's standards. I thought that if I could just get their approval, everything would fall into place. But as I look at what I've accomplished, I see that the greatest reward isn't the approval I once craved. It's the knowledge that I did it on my own terms. I learned that the fear of losing my family's approval had been my greatest obstacle. It was never about the business itself, but about the fear of not being accepted. But as I grew stronger in my own sense of self-worth, I realized that their love and approval didn't define me. What mattered was that I built something with my own hands, something that reflected who I am and what I value. That realization gave me a sense of freedom I had never known before. I didn't need their validation to feel worthy. I didn't need to explain myself or apologize for my choices. Now, when I look back at the sacrifices, the struggles, the late nights spent working when I could have been with my family, I see the worth in every moment. It wasn't just about making money or proving a point. It was about building something that would last. Something that wasn't just about me, but about the future I wanted to create, a future that I could be proud of. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I don't need to seek approval anymore. What I've built is more than just a business. It's a testament to my character, to my grit, and to my determination. And now, for the first time in my life, I don't need anyone's permission to be proud of it. It started with a single email, one that I wasn't prepared for, one that changed everything in an instant. Congratulations, Julia. Your business has been nominated for the National Innovation Award. The words felt surreal, like they didn't belong to me, like they were meant for someone else. But as I reread the email, the weight of what it meant sank in. My secret, the business I had kept hidden for so long, was now out in the world, and it was making waves. Within days, the press picked up the story. The same media that had once ignored me, the same industry that had written me off, now wanted to know who I was. Articles began flooding in, detailing my rise, my vision, the company that was quietly changing the landscape. Headlines like "The CEO Who Took on the Family Business" and "Julia Price, the woman who built a legacy of her own," began circulating. The world was watching, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was playing catch-up. I was ready. I had spent years building this business with one goal in mind: independence. It had never been about competing with my family or proving them wrong. It had been about proving to myself that I could succeed without their help or validation. And now, with the business being recognized on a national scale, I finally felt like I had reached a turning point. I no longer needed my family's approval to feel validated. I had done it on my own, and the world was seeing that. I stood in front of the press at my first public conference, a microphone in hand, and for the first time, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid of their judgment. I had already carved my path, built my legacy, and now I was stepping into the light, embracing everything that came with it. There were no more shadows, no more hiding. The recognition I had long feared was now a badge of honor, and I wore it proudly. But as the business grew, so did the future I had once only dreamed about. My vision was no longer limited by the fear of disappointing anyone. It was clear now. This was my moment. I began to look beyond the immediate success of the company. What came next? I wasn't just focused on expanding the business. I wanted to create something lasting, something that would have an impact far beyond what I had built so far. My dream was to create a space for others like me, people who didn't fit into traditional molds, people who wanted to create on their own terms. I began outlining plans for new ventures, new markets. I wanted to bring sustainability to industries that had long ignored it, to change the way people thought about business and growth. But it wasn't just about the money or the accolades anymore. It was about creating a culture of empowerment, of self-expression, and of legacy building on my own terms. I saw the potential for growth, not just in profits, but in impact. My business could help reshape the future, and I wasn't going to stop until I had made that change. And as for the family, they weren't entirely out of the picture. Though we'd had our differences, there was a new understanding between us. My father had begun to accept that my success wasn't a rejection of him or the family business. It was simply a different path, one I had chosen for myself. My brothers, while still wary of my independence, had come to respect the work I had done. They could see that I wasn't trying to overshadow the family name, I was just creating my own. I was finally earning their respect, not by following in their footsteps, but by making my own. Still, there were times when the old patterns crept in. My father would still give me advice, unsolicited, of course, about how to run things the right way. But I had learned to smile and nod, knowing that the path I was on was the one I had chosen. I wasn't his successor, and I wasn't his shadow. I was me. And that realization, that shift in mindset, was empowering. It meant I had grown beyond the person who had once begged for approval. Now, I was the one calling the shots, making the decisions that would shape my future. The more I looked at the business, the more I realized that I wasn't just building a company, I was building a legacy. It wasn't just about the work I had done so far or the awards and recognition I had received. It was about the people I had become in the process. The person I was when I first started the company, fearful, uncertain, and craving approval, was no longer the person I saw in the mirror. The woman who stood in front of the press, who made decisions with confidence, who spoke her truth without hesitation, was someone entirely different. I had become the person I had always hoped I would be, strong, independent, and unapologetically myself. I had learned that the road to success was never straight, that it was filled with setbacks, sacrifices, and moments of doubt. But the most important lesson I had learned was that success wasn't about following a prescribed path. It was about finding your own way, even when that meant going against the grain. As I looked ahead, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. This was just the beginning. There was so much more I wanted to accomplish, so many more lives I wanted to touch, so much more to build. The future was full of possibilities, and I was ready for them all. My family had come to terms with my success, and though our relationship wasn't perfect, it was stronger than it had ever been. I had earned their respect, and in doing so, I had earned my own. I stood on the precipice of my future, confident in my ability to face whatever came next. I wasn't just a member of a family legacy anymore. I was a force in my own right. The road ahead was mine to shape, and for the first time, I felt completely in control of my own destiny. The next chapter wasn't just about business, it was about me and the future I was going to build on my own terms. As I stood there, staring at the city lights through the window, the weight of it all began to sink in. The business, the success, the recognition, it was all mine. I had spent so many years fighting for approval, trying to meet expectations that were never my own, but now I had nothing left to prove. My journey had been one of constant doubt and struggle, but in the end, it wasn't about my family's approval or the accolades. It was about embracing my own strength, my own vision, and building something I could be proud of without needing anyone else's validation. For the first time, I realized that I was enough. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to fit into a mold or live by anyone else's rules. I had carved my own path, and with that came the freedom I had always longed for. This wasn't just a business. It was a testament to my independence, my courage, and my refusal to let fear or doubt hold me back. Looking at the future now, I no longer see it as something I have to fight for. I've already proven to myself that I am capable of achieving greatness on my own terms. The world is open to me, and with that freedom, I'm ready to embrace everything that comes next. No longer chasing approval, I stand confidently in the light of my own success, ready for whatever the future holds. This was my moment, my victory, and no one could ever take it away from me. The journey wasn't just about building a business, it was about building me,